Hello there, and welcome to the I Never Knew podcast, also known as Inc. This show dives into the life experiences of people who have been through it all and have come through the other side stronger, better, and triumphant. Each story is raw, authentic, and, at times, heartbreaking. One thing joins it all together: the fact that the stories can help the listener learn and grow. Hosted by life coach Maureen, she sits down each episode with a new guest who will empower the listener to set out on their self-discovery journey and start to heal. Now you'll be joined by Maureen and her special guest. Please enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our newest episode of I Never Knew by life coach Maureen. I was on vacation for the last week, so you can see that little rustiness came in there, but I Never Knew podcast by life coach Maureen, or Inc. Guys, I'm so excited to have our guest today. I can't even tell you the butterflies that I have being able to talk to her. I feel like, and I'm saying what I'm saying, and I don't want anyone to dispute it. I don't think you will after you meet her and hear everything that she's done. I feel as if my next guest is a pioneer in the healing field, in the wellness field, and really made it possible, kind of paved a way for life coaching, because it gave us this new idea of outside of therapy or even inside of therapy, but being able to talk about these things that happen in our families and make us uncomfortable, and learning how to take the steps to deal with it. So my next guest is Laura Davis. Now, Laura has written 7 nonfiction books. She has sold more than 1.8 million copies. Did you hear that, guys? 1.8 million copies. Hashtag goals, my goals. She holds retreats both nationally and internationally for healing, as well as helping students find their voices, tell their stories, and hone their craft as writers. She loves creating supportive, intimate writing communities online, in person, and internationally. And I'm going to start off by saying you guys will all recognize the name of her very first book, which I think is amazing, The Courage to Heal. Welcome, Laura Davis.
Thank you. Thank you for such a lovely and warm introduction.
I'm so happy to have you here. Really, you inspire this new generation. You're inspiring to me when I wrote my books, especially nonfiction, telling my story. Man, it's scary. When you talk about your family, my mother wouldn't even read it for 2 years because she said, I don't know what you're writing in there about me. So I know you can relate to that. So let's start from the beginning. I want to hear, especially the familial relationship with your mom, the difficulties, and then we talk about the parenting where you learn differently how to parent. So you start with your story wherever you think it's pertinent.
Yeah, I think we all have certain things in life that we are obsessed with, certain things that are themes that come up again and again. And for me, it was definitely one of the major ones was my relationship with my mother. I've been a writer my whole life, and the first time I published something about my mother, I was 23 or 24 years old. It was a couple of poems. I'm not a poet, but I did write a couple of poems, and they got published in a anthology that was put together by the very famous writer Tilly Olson. And so, and then like less than a year ago, I published my last book, The Burning Light of Two Stars, which is up here. And that is a memoir, which is about my relationship with my mother from the time of my birth until her death. And, it was such a tumultuous, intense, dramatic, loving, difficult relationship that really defines so much of my life. And whether I was defining myself in opposition to her and breaking all ties with her, or I was trying to reconcile with her, or I ended up taking care of her at the end of her life, despite the fact that she had betrayed me very deeply earlier in my life. So, she's been just such a focal point. Even now, she's been dead for 8 years. I still feel like our relationship is active. I still am evolving in terms of my understanding of her and the kind of very bonded connection we had, for better or worse. My mother and I always had a certain amount of conflict. And in part, I think she saw herself as the sun, and she wanted me as her daughter to basically orbit around her as a little secondary planet. But, that's not who I am. I was another sun. And so the two of us were like, it was these two very intense personalities with very different styles at war with each other. And there were a lot of issues. I grew up in the late 60s and early 70s. So, my dad was a hippie and left the family. I joined a cult when I was a teenager, a spiritual cult. I came out as a lesbian when I was 23. My mother said, "You've confirmed my worst fear about you." I mean, that was kind of her MO, was to just, everything was about her and to spite her. And so we had a pretty volatile relationship, and I really created as much physical distance. I moved 3,000 miles away from her, and it was largely to get away from her and to like have a self that was separate. And the biggest rift between us happened when I was 27. I was in the context of my first really being in love for the first time. And when intimacy and sexuality got mixed together for me, I began to have these memories emerging of having been sexually abused by my grandfather, who was my mother's father. And when I told her, she absolutely sided with her dead father over her living daughter. And, basically I was cast out of her whole side of the family, and they said I was a liar. And then, when Ellen Bass and I published The Courage to Heal a few years later, then it was that I was spreading lies on national TV because we were, the book had such notoriety. And I was basically, catapulted into this kind of weird little area of fame for one of the worst things that had ever happened to me, which was this sexual abuse. So it was kind of, and that once I made the decision to publish that book, which was a book about the healing process, that just sort of cemented the rift between us. And we stayed in that like broken, estranged place for many years.
Wow.
And the thing that started to change it for us, I think there was always a way we were drawn back to each other. And my mother, even though I was kind of cast out, she never stopped loving me or wanting or trying to have a relationship with me. And I was like, you're not coming near me in any way. But I also had a longing for her. And maybe later I'll read something from the memoir that really describes that kind of longing you could have for someone even who has hurt you. And I, when I got pregnant, I was 35. I had my first son at 36. I think I really wanted her to be his grandmother. Despite everything that had happened between us, I'd seen her with my niece, and she actually was a good grandmother. And I wanted that for Eli, my son. And she desperately wanted to know him. And I think that more than anything motivated us to kind of gradually start trying to see if we could at least develop some kind of working relationship. And so that was the period in my 30s and 40s, and we did achieve some reconciliation, and I think there was peace but no intimacy. There was no real connection between us. I never made myself vulnerable to her in any way. And then the memoir I wrote picks up when she was 80 years old. She called me from her home in New Jersey. I was in California, and she made the proclamation that she was moving to my town for the rest of her life. And that's where that's what's called the inciting incident of the memoir, is that phone call. It just kicks up this whole experience where I was catapulted into this world I didn't want, but part of me kind of hoped that something, we would be able to heal our relationship the rest of the way. I think I had that hope, even though there'd been so much betrayal and anger and all that in the past. So that's the story I told,
Yeah. And it's so interesting. There's so much to unpack there of, it's so easy to cut off strangers, or it's so easy to say, oh, that friend, I'm just going to not do that. But when it comes to family, I don't know if it's obligation. I don't know if it's just this soul connection that we have with them, or the purpose that we are in each other's lives. But I always feel like I have the same situation, now estranged with my daughter. And it's interesting how much we'll put up with from family members and from relatives, but you still want it. You still hope for it in the back of your mind. You think they're going to get it. They're going to get me at some point. And I love your story because all along the way, you're pushing her away, but somewhere inside you still want that, and you're just hoping and praying that she's going to get it and she's going to come back and be that mom that you hope she's going to be. And
Yeah, I think I'd given up that she was ever going to be that person. I mean, I knew that she wasn't going to have like a major personality transplant and become what I wanted her to be, but I think there was still, yeah, there was still a longing. And in fact, that's you'd asked me to prepare something to read, and that's actually, there's a little tiny clip of the memoir I'd like to read, and it's
yes.
about this issue. And most of the book takes place after she moves to California. So she's moved so I could take care of her for the rest of her life, despite this huge betrayal that's still at the core unresolved in our past. And this scene takes place, she's 81 years old. She's in the early stages of dementia. And I'm going through the motions of really being a good daughter. Like, I'm doing all the right things in terms of being her caregiver and arranging her medical appointments and going to the doctor with her and sorting out her pills and helping her find a place to live and all these things. But really, my heart is still really hardened against her. So it's performative almost.
Yeah.
And in this scene that I'm going to read to you, I have just visited her after I was away for work or something for a week. I come back and I'm doing all these things for her. Mostly it was like fixing her computer, getting her printer to work. She couldn't do anything with technology. Um, and she confronted me about my coldness toward her. And so afterward, I wrote this. 3 decades earlier, I had erected an impenetrable wall between us, a fortress with narrow slits so I could watch her approach. I ensured that my defenses were prepared anytime she came near me. I always had an escape plan. It's true, we later reconciled, and the fact that we were able to create a functional relationship was a miracle, but it wasn't an intimate miracle because I never took down my wall. Oh, I taught myself to be kind to her in a fake it till you make it sort of way, but I still held her at bay. My wall just got subtler. It wasn't permeable. It was hard and opaque, and there was no door. We only met in the antechamber, the common room where guests are received. Only my polished self was on display, and only in the antechamber. Mom never saw my inner sanctum, and I never saw hers. I got as close as I could within the constraints I had established. But closed is closed, and a closed heart is a lonely one. The price I paid to keep my mother out, at first with withdrawal, later with an armed fortress, and finally with the polite rules of détente, was love. The pure, unfettered love I longed for, the pure, unfettered love she craved. That day in the kitchen when I couldn't comfort her, I had to face it. My mother was still a stranger to me, with tentacles of need I was loath to touch. I wanted to be more than kind, to do more than merely what was right. I wanted to love my mother, just once, freely and with the relief of a lost, exhausted child, beyond words and beyond all pretense. I wanted to lay my head on a place that was safe, just once, before it was too late.
Wow. I'm entranced. I hope you do an audiobook. Did you do
I did record the audiobook.
Oh, yeah.
I really enjoyed that so much. I was a radio producer and a talk show host in my 20s. And so I love audio, and I really had a good time performing the book. It was fun.
I have to get the audiobook. I love reading a physical book. I'm kind of old school, so I like turning the pages, but I just was listening to you in a trance, and I can picture it. You know, she had tentacles of need I was loath to touch. I have goosebumps.
We all have people in our lives like that, don't we?
Oh my goodness. I definitely can relate to that. I have an adult child that I say I love her, but I love her way over there. It's just not good for me. In today's society, we would say, obviously, the kind of catchphrase narcissism. Do you think your mother had traits of narcissism, or was there something else going on underneath the surface? Was it just a butting of heads? We're just different people. I say my daughter's my greatest teacher. What do you think?
I think it's very complicated, and I tend to shy away from labeling people with psychological labels because, especially as a writer, if you say, my father was a horrible alcoholic, or my mother was such a narcissist, or she was bipolar, or a drug addict or something, it doesn't give you anything tangible as a reader. Like, you don't know what kind of drug, like, but if you say, every night when I went to sleep, I could hear the sound of my father treading up the stairs, and by the creak of the stairs, I could tell how much he'd been drinking. Like, that's a much more concrete way to describe someone. So, like with my mother, I really tried to describe her behavior and the way she would gaslight me, and her unpredictability, and her self-centeredness, and her, just so many challenging qualities, rather than giving her a label. I let the reader determine what she is, but I want them to see her as a person, not as a diagnosis.
Yeah. And gosh, that's something I actually write about in my book, called Don't Label, because once you do that, it's like, once you do that, all of a sudden, you give an excuse for things, or people have this predisposed idea of what a narcissist is. And there's so many different versions, or like you say, an addict can be there's completely different addicts. There's eating, there's drugs, there's alcohol, there's attention. I mean, there's a lot of ways to be addicted. I love that you say that. One of the things that I really loved was the fact that you wanted to love her so bad, and you wanted it to be an unconditional love. And I think when we have difficult people like that in our lives, it's always so conditional. And so
it was totally conditional. I mean, it was so, I had so many rules and boundaries, and she would always crash through my rules and boundaries, but I was always trying to set them. And I think the thing that was so poignant really at the end of her life was that, she was living in assisted living for a while. And her dementia got worse and worse until she basically was, never really left her room, except they'd like wheel her out for meals. And she was such a shadow of who she used to be, which was she was an actor. She was a world traveler. She got her master's degree. She did all these incredible things, and was very charismatic. And then she was just like sitting there with her teeth out, and I would walk in her room, and I would think, I'd see the mask on her face. I think, this is what she's going to look like when she's dead, and I would both feel so drawn to go visit her. It was almost like, I described it like a second umbilical cord had grown between us in her old age. And yet I'd get there and I'd immediately think, when could I leave? I have to get out of here. And then I would feel guilty, but it was just like, it was so painful to see her so diminished. But what would happen is that I would walk in her room, and she would go from this like collapsed, like I said, almost like vegetative state, and she would slowly like look at me, and her whole face would transform and light up, and she would just say, "Lori, you're the best daughter in the whole world." And she would say that over, when people have dementia, they repeat themselves over. And so I would hear that, 20 times in one visit, and she would say things that were funny too. Like she'd say, "You and Karen you have done such a great job with those kids. Who says lesbians shouldn't have children? This is, and so there was this sweetness and this like unconditional love was coming my way that I had longed for my whole life. But who was it coming from? This shell of a person who bore so little resemblance to the mother I had known and feared and hated and loved my whole life. So it was a very complicated time in my life.
It's interesting though,
Yeah.
because really my grandmother also had dementia and Alzheimer's, and I saw her, and her and I were best friends. My grandmother I was closer to her than my mother growing up. And I remember in that stage, she was also in an assisted living. And I remember there were those moments of lucidity. And I think, and maybe we can break through a little bit, just kind of combine here our thoughts. I feel like at that point, she would say whatever was on her mind. Now, my grandmother, obviously, she was born in the 22. So they were very guarded and they had to present themselves a certain way. And so when she had dementia, it was, in the beginning stages, she would just say what was on her mind. And I feel like
the sensors are off.
Yeah. So when you said she was a shell of herself, I was thinking, nah, I think the shell came off, and I think her.
Well, yes, yes, that is a total, yes, I can see that's a whole other way of looking at it. So yes, there was truth. And what it was really under her whole personality structure that was so complicated and convoluted, was just this pure love. Like she really had been devoted to me, even though she had, so it was, I wanted to write a story that was very complex. I didn't want anyone to be the hero or the villain. I didn't want to be the hero. I didn't want her to be the villain. And I wanted us both to be flawed, imperfect, damaged people struggling to become more whole, both in ourselves and with each other. And I think I succeeded at that. And it took me 10 years to write this book, and many more years thinking about it. And I think part of it was, at first I did present her as the villain and I was the wronged party, and that's a pretty boring story. And so I had to really do my psychological work, my spiritual work, and also just by rewriting and rewriting and rewriting hundreds of times, I got more honest. As a friend of mine, a friend and colleague said, my first book was called The Courage to Heal. She said, Laura, this isn't the courage to heal, it's the courage to reveal.
Oh, I love
that. And I put that on my wall when I was writing, and I just started telling more of the truth. And, I teach writing. I've been teaching writing for like 25 years. And one thing I always tell my students is, I ask, like, what's the story under the story? What do you have? These habitual stories we all do that we tell about our lives, and we tell them to ourselves, and then we tell them to other people. And if you're a writer, you write it down. But what's the story underneath that? Or what's the part you never told anyone before? And that's where storytelling gets really interesting, is when we crack the crust of the habitual, the story where we're the hero or we're the victim, or we have it all figured out. We have everybody in there playing their roles in their little boxes. And
that's what it sounds like. It sounds like this book is the most raw that I think you have ever written. And that's saying a lot, because your books are all raw and storytelling and revealing.
But they're not about me primarily.
Yeah.
I've always interviewed a lot of people and included a lot of really powerful first person stories, but very little of my own. Maybe like a little hint or a little bit. But of course, a memoir is entirely bearing my own story. And I didn't write it to bear anything. It's just, especially right now, there's so much divisiveness in our country. There's so many people, family members, split apart over politics and the elections and the vaccines and, so many other things. And we're so ready to compartmentalize and become enemies with someone and drop our friends if they don't believe the way we believe, and to so easily feel betrayed. And, we need to connect with each other. I mean, the only way these divisions are going to heal is when we get beyond those divisions and into our deep humanity. And one of the reasons I love teaching writing is, in a writing group, if you get you create an environment where someone really tells the truth about their life, you're going to find out how they came to their opinion, how they came to their point of view, and they're suddenly going to make sense. They're not just going to be, the stupid person with that wrong opinion sitting across the room. It's like suddenly you have compassion for them because you understand the story. There's a new podcast that the New York Times is putting out, and I think it's called First Person. And I was binge listening to it recently. And their tagline for that show is, "Underneath every opinion, there's a story."
Yes.
And that's what I'm talking about, and that's what I love about a writing group is the incredible intimacy that occurs when people tell true stories about their lives, and when someone is listening without judgment, without evaluation, but just as a witness. It becomes very sacred, and that's what I love the most, is that kind of connecting that happens when people write and share their work in a trusted, safe environment.
Yes. Hence the title of my podcast is I never knew. And what's interesting is, when I'm coaching and doing the things that I do, I find the fear of being that vulnerable and telling our story, once overcome, it creates these connections that you can never go back and you'll never be the same person. And then there's sort of, dare I say, an addiction. I have an addiction to hearing stories of people. And my husband and I have a favorite word, and it's sonder. And you'll never, it's the idea that I'll never see anything from your point of view because I've never lived every moment of your life up to the moment we meet.
Right.
And if we as humans having a human experience, which is what you said, I wanted my mom and I not to be villains, but I wanted everyone to just see we're just having a human experience. These are the things that we went through in our relationship. I think we're doing better. I think we're being more inclusive. I think we're learning that you're happy is you're happy. Love yourself, find your self-worth. I think we're doing better. And maybe I'm just a Pollyanna, which I tend to be, but I want it to be that way. And I visualize this world where it's Atlantis, and we're all just gonna be kumbaya and love each other. And my part in that is this: let's listen to one another. Let's, instead of, and I interrupted myself. I think of those toxic relationships. I've learned since I healed to be able to look at things more from people's perspective. It's those that are unhealed that have those guards up. Like you said, the fortress with the slits. Oh, what a beautiful visual I had. I'm thinking I'm looking out and I'm guarded, but I still want to see what's going on out there. And I just think that's such a beautiful visual of kind of what we're doing in life is we're guarded, but we really want to peek out there, and we really do want to have those connections. So I just think that's such a beautiful thing that you said there. I love the title of your book, I Thought We'd Never Speak Again. I think that was such a profound one. For me, this is something I wanted to really talk about on the podcast because I have difficulty with this, and I think my listeners are going to really relate to this. So in her book, I Thought We'd Never Speak Again, she says, making a crucial distinction between reconciliation and forgiveness, she explains how people can make peace in relationships without necessarily forgiving past hurts. That's a tough one. Tell us, how do you guide someone to say you can reconcile, but you don't have to forgive, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think, forgiveness is such an incredibly personal experience and personal choice. I forgave my mother. I forgave my father, who walked out on me when I was 14 and dropped out and became a hippie. I even forgave my grandfather, who had sexually abused me. But I didn't try to do those things. Like, from my experience of forgiveness, is it was a natural byproduct of a very long commitment to a deep healing process, which included separation, which included being enraged, which included grief, which included getting through my shame about any responsibility I felt I had in those situations. So I think the only truly essential forgiveness is for ourselves. If there's any way we're blaming ourselves, let's say, a woman is raped and she says, well, I was the one who was drunk, or I wore the provocative outfit, or I was stupid, I shouldn't have gone home with him, or that's what the forgiveness that's essential. I think when you're talking about a perpetrator, you don't owe your perpetrator anything. And it's really a personal decision. I think ultimately we have to release that rage that we might be carrying. I think anger can be a very strong propellant in the healing process, but there comes a point where it no longer serves us and it's keeping us trapped in the past and keeping us from moving on. And then I think we have to release it. We have to move past the injury to whatever extent we can and move forward into our lives. But people will urge you to do that prematurely, like you're just starting to deal with a trauma, and it's like, well, that happened a long time ago. Can't you just let it go, or let bygones be bygones, or it was a
Yeah.
long time ago, or but I think we have to earn the right to let go of these things by doing the work. You can't just like snap your fingers and move past them. And I think even if, like, I always say when I talk about having taken care of my mother, who she wasn't an abuser, but she did betray me in a really deep way when I needed her the most. And I don't feel like I owed her taking care of her at the end of her life. It was a choice I made. And I think when someone has deeply betrayed you or wounded you, the kind of the normal, natural expectations of like children should take care of their parents, it they lose that at the moment they abuse you. You don't owe them that. And I really want to stress this to people, because I don't want people to think, well, Laura Davis is saying that we have to forgive, or that we have to take care of our elderly parents who hurt us. No, you don't. We get to choose these things. But I think you can find peace whether or not you directly have a relationship with that person or not. Sometimes the very, very best thing we can do is absolutely walk away from someone who is too toxic, too difficult, or completely undermines our well-being when we're in their company. Then why would we want to keep being in their company?
Yeah.
So I think there's different levels of what you decide to do, and but I think ultimately there is a way to find peace, even if you're talking about your situation with your daughter. It reminds me when I wrote that reconciliation book, I thought we'd never speak again, which is basically a how-to guide. There was a woman who was deeply estranged from a family member, and the person was just too difficult for her to have a relationship with. And the way she said, I closed the door, but I left the porch light on.
Oh, I
And
love
for me, that
that.
was so beautiful, because it was like, I'm setting boundaries. I can't, see this person in person ever again, or I can only whatever the parameters were in her case. But on the inside, there was still love. There was still, after all the anger, the desire to wish that person well in the deepest way. I think the other thing, like with my mother, and I think as people mature, is that I got to a point finally, after decades really, of being able to see her not just as my mother, but as a very complex human being. I looked at the generation she grew up in. I looked at the fact that she was the only child in her whole family to go to college. She grew up in an incredibly poor family with immigrant parents, where she felt all this shame about her poverty. She grew up in a generation where she had to fight like hell to be allowed to go to free college in New York City. And the options for her as a woman were very limited. She could be, a nurse, a teacher, or a social worker, basically, if she wanted to have a professional career. And out of that upbringing and those kind of limited expectations of women, she actually was an incredibly courageous person who broke a lot of new ground. And so I began to have more admiration for her when I could see her kind of from a very different vantage point than just, she was a really difficult mother, and I hope that I have 3 children, and they're all adults. I hope that they can see me the same way, as much more complex than whatever they might not like about the way I parented them. I want them to see me as more than just their mother, but as a complicated human being. And, I think often we can't get to that point until we have children ourselves. And then it's suddenly like, oh my God, now I see how impossible this job is. And I think there are some people who never even try. They don't try. They just, they're abusive, they're horrible, and they don't make an effort to grow or improve. But my mother was not one of them. She was someone who wanted to grow, and I think she did grow a lot in her life, but she had limited capacity. And it was just the 8th anniversary of her death, and what I found myself thinking about was that she it's almost like she pushed me over the finish line. Like, she couldn't cross the finish line into confronting this family legacy of incest in my family and a lot of other things that I was courageous enough to face. She couldn't do it, but she gave me the strength to do it, even though then she stood up and denied the whole thing. So I felt like we want the next generation to have more, in this case, more psychological health, more capacity, more strength. And I think I was a stronger person in some ways.
I
And
always,
I appreciate that. I thank her for that
yeah,
now. But I
yes.
never really, it was so complicated. I never understood it. When I was young, everything was so black and white.
Oh, completely. And we didn't talk about these things in our generation, and growing up. It was just really kind of survival mode. At least in my house, it was just get up, go to school, go to work. And, there wasn't this feel. We didn't talk about feelings. And I love what you said about you chose to do it. And I think choice is always empowering. And at the end, you made the choice and you didn't feel forced, like I had to do this for her. And it led to that healing. When you talked about anger, I always think of anger as a sprint. It can't go on forever. You
Yeah,
can't,
that's really nice.
you have to, it runs out. It runs out. And I talked to my husband about this. There's all these stages of grief they talk about. I think there's stages of healing. And I think anger is a good one. For me, anger helps get me over the hump to the compassion point. And I think everyone that I talk to or coach, I say, when you look back at these things that are so painful, the greater the pain, the greater the growth. And you look back and you say, I'm grateful for that because now I got to do this and this, and it all led to this path afterwards and helping someone else, being that ripple in the lake. I really feel like it's hard to get there and it does take time. But like you said, doing that inner work, it trusts the process, right? Just trust the process. You got to get there
Yeah,
at some point.
I've had this kind of debate with a lot of people over the years about, I think the thing that I hated hearing the most when I was in the throes of dealing with incest was, we draw things to us that we need to grow, or, you chose your parents for a reason. And I would just piss the hell out of me. And I am not glad that I was sexually abused. I do think it has created both some incredible strengths in me, and actually many opportunities, and it has also limited my life and created some damage that I don't think I will ever wholly recover from. I used to think you could just get over everything. I'm old enough that I know that that's not the case.
Right.
So yes, I think that sometimes tragedies in our life can lead to opportunities, but it doesn't always. Sometimes it just sucks.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just awful, and people don't recover from everything. And I think it's important to say that as well, because otherwise it becomes a little too sweet and a little too pat and a little too tied up, like, everything we go through in life is going to bring us to a better place. Well, sometimes it doesn't. And I've met many people for whom it didn't. And I think we try to make the best of things. And I think, committing to growing as much as we can is really important. And sometimes it's just like, I wish that had never happened, because now my life is different in a way that I will never get over.
Yeah. No, I had this, Madeline and I are mutual friends. She said the same thing. She said, I don't believe everything happens for a reason. And then we,
Right.
we had a little bit of a debate, and I by no means ever want to diminish that when bad things happen. Oh, well, it's supposed to be that way. I think for me, like you said, whatever did happen was showing me my strength, was teaching me to be more aware, teaching me to be a better parent, or just to bring the awareness of what I don't want. It's not necessarily, oh, this is great, I'm so grateful this happened. I'm a victim of not a victim, I'm no longer a victim, but I was a victim of domestic violence in my marriage. And yeah, no, I didn't want that. And I remember my father-in-law saying, he'd come over after this violent episode and he'd say, "What did you do to make him do that?" And it was just like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Not something I wanted, not something I wanted my children to witness. That's why I got out of it. But I definitely agree with you.
How did you respond when he would say that to you?
He was a bleep. He just, I
I was
kind of,
going to say what the bleep was. Yeah.
yeah, I just expected that from him. He just was such a just not a nice person, and having that compassion, looking at my ex-husband as how he grew up with that kind of a bleep, I had some compassion and thought, oh my gosh, he was abused basically with violence. So I tried to be understanding. He didn't make it right, but I tried to have understanding for it. That's what I love about being able to go to that bird's eye view and look down. When you said that about your mom, when you took off the glasses of I'm a hurt daughter, which they never really come off, but we're gonna just pretend for a minute. Okay, no, remember the glasses that had the shades that go over the glasses? So there we go. We just put a little bit of the thing on top of it, but seeing her as a woman and seeing the struggles that she had, it really does, I think, ease a little bit of that. My mother was same thing, raised in a very strict Irish Catholic household. She raised her brothers and sisters. I mean, her mom had a baby when she was 15. My mother had to do all the work. And I was able to look back and say, well, of course, my mom wasn't going to appreciate having kids. She saw them as a burden and literally was programmed to see them as a burden. So my mom thought, you just have kids. That's kind of the generation ancestral Irish Catholic belief, is just keep having kids and it's expected of you. But she didn't really grasp, it's a blessing. It's fun to have kids. Embrace it. You can be close with your kids. And so I had to do the same thing with my mother, was take a step back and be like, well, I can kind of understand why it wasn't her goal to be a mom. It was just expected of her. So I appreciate that you said, looking at all the struggles your mom had.
Right. I had many more choices, and many more opportunities. Definitely. Yeah.
I can. Do you feel like so at the end, did you feel like there was any closure there? And I know I know that's such a terrible word. I hate closure, the word. Did we ever get closure? No. But
She died. I mean, she did die. That was definitely closure. I mean, when someone dies, although like I said, my relationship with her has continued in the 8 years since her death. Absolutely. In fact, it's pretty lively at times. I think, the question I was trying to answer in the memoir is, can you caretake a parent who betrayed you in the past?
yeah.
And, throughout the book, there are certain things I hope I will get from my mother. And I'm not going to tell you or
No
tell people
spoilers.
watching, whether I got it or not. I think that's one reason people want to read the book. Is like, well, what happened?
Yeah.
Did you find that peace you wanted? Did you get what you wanted from her? Were these two incredibly dramatic people ever able to find peace before the end? And what did that peace look like? And I think there's a certain human beings are very complex. We really are, and I find I find people fascinating, and I find myself fascinating, and I feel like I am still changing, in my life, moving into a new phase of my life right now, and I like that there's that possibility, of continuing to evolve, continuing to change, and interestingly, I think that was something my mother and I had in common, even though we did it in very different ways. But she was someone who she went to therapy in her life. She took classes. She studied the Course in Miracles. She was interested in growth, really, and only could achieve it to a certain degree. And there were certain areas that were just like, so reactive. There was no getting through them. But I have grown in my respect for her over the years. Um, and she was really adored by many people, but she was just a hell of a difficult mother to have.
That's interesting. That's interesting. There's such a duality going on there. That surprised me when you said she was into doing growth. She was taking classes and therapy, and that's a growth mindset. And then you think, but when it came to that relationship between the two of you, it was just stuck. It was just stuck on stop. And,
Stuck,
you
really
know,
stuck.
and really you just, and my mother is very similar. We don't talk about things that happened in the past. What I realized was a changing point for me with my parents, because I've always felt like kind of the odd duck, you know, the black sheep. I've always been different. And I've always felt I needed their validation, their validation. Well, my father got very sick in February. And I remember all the success that I started having, and they weren't acknowledging it. And I remember seeing my father in the hospital sick. And Laura, I literally had this aha moment like, they're oblivious. They're not doing it intentionally. They're just oblivious to what I need. And that's just not a dynamic that we had in our family, was to say, I need this from you. So I had this acceptance. I think, forget closure. I think acceptance really is helpful. What do you think of that?
I think it's very helpful to accept the way things are. In my writing classes, sometimes I give this writing prompt. It's a repeating line. I like to, where you give someone a line and then every paragraph or every stanza, they repeat that line at the beginning. And then it actually ends up being a really strong piece of writing. And one of them is, this is the way things are right now. And then they write, so then they write for 5 minutes about, their critically sick child, and then the next line is, this is the way things are right now. And they write about our broken democracy, and then it's, this is the way things are right now. And maybe they write about walking outside into the most beautiful sunset and just feeling the joy of beauty. And then this is the way things are right now, and they talk about they're going in for a test to find out if their cancers come back, or whatever. And that that kind of assessment of our own lives, and that it's really an acceptance of, this is the way things are right now. Because we spend so much trying to get away from reality, trying to get away from what is actually happening. It's like, this is the way things are right now. I'm not speaking to my daughter. This is the
Yeah.
way things are right now. My grandson is blah, 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 and it could be for good and it could be, this is the way things are right now because things are going really well at that moment for you. But usually I think when I hear students read these pieces or when I write one, what's most powerful is when it's a blend. There's like the incredible challenges in life at the same time that there's beauty. And I feel like particularly in the last few years, the pandemic certainly, I'd say, the last 5 or 6 years, I think things have gotten very difficult in so many parts of our lives, that my need for beauty has drastically increased. Like, I spend a lot of time in nature because for me, the natural world, whether I live like a 20-minute walk from the ocean, so it's the ocean. I grew up on the East Coast near the ocean. Now I live in the West Coast near the ocean. So it's the ocean, or it's going hiking in the mountains, or it's, walking in a beautiful wooded path. There's something that gives me that help is like such an exercise too, moving my body, swimming or walking. It's like an antidote to the despair that I feel like, for me, and I think for millions of people in our country, is a daily companion now. This existential despair about the future, and things look very bleak in so many ways. And so for me, where can I find joy today? Where can I find something beautiful? Where can I find a moment of just deep human connection with another human being, even if it's for 5 minutes? Um, and I feel hungry for that. I feel like I need those things just to stand up and face the world every day.
Yeah. I found that what we went through with COVID, the pandemic, and everyone going inside, I feel that we learned how to simplify. I feel like I'm so simple
Right.
now. I
Yeah.
We were just in Boston on vacation, my husband and I, and I'm just taking pictures of flowers and plants. And that just wouldn't have been me 20 years ago. It would have been, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Well, give me something exciting. And I think the simplicity that came from that, because you had to find things of joy around you because you really were put in this sort of bubble of your world. And I think that what came out of that is good. And I think you're right. As we age, I think we need those things that bring us joy. We have to have those wins, those little things that just, I don't care what it is, which is great that you said that, because one of my questions I love to ask is what is your shameless self-indulgence?
Oh, shameless self-indulgence. Hmm. Hmm. I love hot water. So I love like steam baths. I love sweat lodges. And we had a house fire many years ago, like 23 years ago, something like that. A fire, 20 years ago, a fire, and our house burned totally. And the insurance money that we got, there was a bathroom that was like had water damage and smoke damage, and we tore out that bathroom. And I went to this shop in California where they had like a block that was a warehouse full of bathtubs. Like just as far as the eye could see, there were all these bathtubs. And I went in there and I sat in probably 5 bathtubs until I found and I bought it. And I wanted to drill a hole so the water would. I had that bathtub for 2 years, and it doesn't have like the drain, so you could fill it up and overflow it, which has happened more than once in our house. Because then you ruin the floor and everything. But you could fill it up really high, so you could have this really deep. And I make the water super hot, and I use either Epsom salts or some kind of bath, lotion or bubbles or something. And at night when I need to unwind, I love going in that bathtub, and I have a little heater in the ceiling. And usually I read. Sometimes I call a friend and talk on the phone, or sometimes I call my brother, and he's the last surviving member of my nuclear family. Sometimes we talk at night if I'm in the bathtub. But that is my big indulgence, especially because there's a drought in California and I should not take long, deep baths. But I find that I try to resist, and it really is like the number one stress reducer for me.
Yeah.
And if you read my memoir, there's definitely some bathtub scenes in it, because it's part of my self-care that really works really well.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's my self-indulgence.
That's why I ask. It's so fascinating. Like you said, humans are so complicated. And I love to see what people do for themselves, and I love to encourage that. So I'm with you. I have my husband set up a hot tub in our backyard, and it's just
nice.
oh my gosh, it's just my thing. And it's got one lounge, and it's mine. It's the Queen's throne. So don't, and it's 120 degrees here in Arizona. Sometimes it gets that hot. I'll still be in that hot tub. I do not care, because I'm like, you give me the hot water. So I love that. Last question before I go. You're going downtown, you're holding a banner with 100,000 people behind you. What does your banner say?
I'm sick of protesting the same old shit.
Woo, girl!
That's what it would say.
Yes!
That's the words of an old activist. I'm sick of protesting the same shit.
I love that. I love that. And then it's also like, inquiring minds want to know, what shit are you talking about? That's on your banner. I want to know. Just the same thing.
Well, women's rights, abortion, rights for gay people, like equality, that's what it would be. It'd be all the injustice, fighting injustice.
I am
that's
right with you.
About.
That's my favorite subject, is injustice. We don't have a justice system. We have a legal system. I think we're going backwards with women's health and LGBTQ. We have a lot of stuff going on, and we have a lot more to do. And I really think we're doing good with some recognition of mental health issues, but I think we've got a long way to go. So I really love your banner, because I think you're right. We got to quit repeating. We got to start succeeding. So I just thank you so much. I learned so much from you. I just need you to know your books are in my cart, in my Amazon cart right now, because but now that I heard you reading it, I have to remove those and do the audio because
Right.
I was just in awe. I'll listen to them in the hot tub, as a matter of fact. But thank you so much for being here. Tell us where we can find you, where all your books are, where they can sign up for your retreats, your teachings, your
Yeah.
writing, all of it. Give us all of it.
All right. So my website is the best place, lauradavis.net. And lauradavis.net, there you could find all information about the books. You could read the first 5 chapters of The Burning Light of 2 Stars for free.
Wow.
You could learn about my weekly online classes. People could take these writing classes from anywhere in the world. And also the retreats I run. And next year, I'm going to be taking a group of writers back to, last year I took a group to a incredible villa in Tuscany. And I'm going back next May for this very luxurious 10-day writer's trip to Tuscany. I'm going to take a group of 12 people hiking the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And we're going to do a little bit of sketching, a little bit of writing, and creating these travel journals as we hike. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things I love to do with people. And then just, garden variety writing workshops. I also have a free book on my site if you sign up for my mailing list. And it's a 30-day writing practice called Writing for Courage. And it's prompts that help give people courage. And you don't have to consider yourself a writer to use these prompts, but that's there also, and you could sign up and get that. So it's lauradavis.net. You could also find me on social media. Facebook is at The Writer's Journey, and on Instagram, I'm at Laura Sari, Sari Davis. But I would say my website is the best source for everything. You could reach me there as well.
Wonderful. And I'm going to have all of that, all the links, guys, when we have her episode go live. We'll make sure that you guys have all the information to get those books and to get a hold of Laura. I so appreciate you being here today. You're just so interesting. And I swear I'm going to be thinking about you being like, I just want to call Laura and have her talk to me and read her book to me. So I love
I'll come back. Invite me again in the future. I'll come back. We could talk about other things. And if you listen to the book, drop me an email afterwards. I want to know how the story impacted you.
Yes, absolutely. And I might just be in Tuscany in May because my birthday's in May. So,
Oh, yeah.
that might be a gift. I haven't been to Italy, so I might just have to drop that bug in my husband's ear. So
yeah,
thank you for being here. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed Laura as much as I did. I don't know how you couldn't. I just think she's absolutely fantastic and just amazing. I just feel her presence is so positive. And we all are having a human experience, going through the same thing. We all have family struggles and dynamics that go on. So none of you are alone. That's why we do this podcast. I never knew. So what we realize is everyone has experiences similar to us, and we're all just going through it together and learning from one another. If you have any comments, please go to lifecoachmaureen.com. Leave those comments if you'd like to be a guest. If you have anything you would like me to share with Laura, I'll help you find all of her links to buy her books and to connect with her. And if you are interested in also purchasing my books or my life coaching, so on Amazon, my dog is more enlightened than I am. And my dog is my relationship coach because I think dogs simplify life way more than we do. Sometimes they just they always live in the present. And that's what we need to do more of. So thank you all for being here. Leave us a 5-star review. Share this with your friends and spread the word. Let's build this community. Let's help one another even more and spread the word. We have a movement going on here. We want change. So thank you, Miss Laura. I appreciate you so much.
You're welcome, Maureen. Thanks for having me as a guest.
Thank you for tuning in to the I Never Knew podcast. If you found today's episode inspiring and educational, please be sure to follow, subscribe, and spread the word. The more people that join the Inc. community, the more it can develop and influence others as we work together for a healthier and brighter future. Until next time.